Her name was Maureen Sullivan. She was 12 years old. A man in her own home had been hurting her for months. She finally told her teacher, thinking someone would help, thinking adults would protect her. 24 hours later, Maureen was standing in front of a grey stone building surrounded by walls topped with broken glass. Nuns in black habits took her clothes and gave her a grey uniform. They sat her in a chair and cut her hair short. They told her she would no longer use her name. Maureen asked when she could go home. No one answered. For the next 4 years, this 12-year-old girl scrubbed sheets 14 hours a day without payment. She was not allowed to speak. And whenever government inspectors came to check on the place, the nuns hid her in an underground tunnel because a child working as a slave was hard to explain. This is not a story from the Middle Ages. This happened in 1964. The last of these places closed in 1996. They were called the Magdalene Laundries, and what the Catholic Church in Ireland did to 30,000 women inside these walls is one of the darkest chapters in modern history. Everything in this video is backed by survivor testimonies, government investigations, and official records. None of this is made up. If you want more stories like this, hit like and subscribe, and stay with me until the end. Because what happened inside these walls was worse than you think. To understand how a 12-year-old girl could be punished for being a victim, you need to understand how Ireland worked back then. Ireland wasn't just a Catholic country. The Catholic Church ran Ireland. Not behind the scenes, not through suggestions. They ran it. Priests didn't just give sermons on Sundays. They decided who got jobs and who didn't. If the local priest liked you, doors opened. If he didn't, good luck. Bishops didn't just run churches, they controlled what children learned in schools. The government paid the teachers, but the church decided what they taught. Nuns didn't just pray, they ran the hospitals, they ran the orphanages, they ran the places where society put anyone it didn't want to deal with. If the church said you were guilty, you were guilty. No trial, no evidence. The priest's word was enough, and in this world, nothing destroyed a woman faster than her reputation. Get pregnant without being married? You weren't just a woman who made a mistake. You were dirty. You were dangerous. And they needed to put you somewhere nobody could see you. If a man hurt you, nobody blamed him. They blamed you. They said you must have done something to cause it. If you were an orphan with no family to keep you in line, the church saw you as a problem waiting to happen. And if you were simply too pretty, that was dangerous too. Beauty meant attention. Attention meant trouble. Better to lock you away before something went wrong. That's why Maureen Sullivan was punished for being a victim. In the eyes of the church, there were no innocent victims. If something bad happened to you, you must have done something to deserve it. So Ireland built a system to deal with these women. 4 religious orders split the country between them like it was a business. The Sisters of Mercy took some areas. The Sisters of Our Lady of Charity took others. The Sisters of Charity and the Good Shepherd Sisters divided the rest. And the government didn't just look the other way. They were part of it. Courts sent women to the laundries as punishment. Police dragged back anyone who tried to escape. Government agencies sent orphans and girls they called difficult straight to the nuns. The Irish military sent its uniforms to be washed there. Hotels and hospitals sent their sheets. Even the president's official residence used these laundries. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone benefited from it. And the women who did the work never saw a single penny. But here's the question that everyone asks. How could nuns do this? How could women who gave their lives to God treat other women this way? The answer is simple, and it's disturbing. Most of these nuns went into convents as children, some as young as 12 or 13. They never lived in the real world. They never learned what normal kindness looked like. They grew up inside a system that taught them certain women were spiritually dirty, almost less than human, and that the only way to clean them was through suffering. These nuns didn't think they were being cruel. They believed they were saving souls. Every beating brought a woman closer to God. Every punishment cleaned her spirit. Every year of unpaid work was an act of mercy. They believed They were doing God's work. And that's what made them so dangerous. They weren't villains who enjoyed hurting people. They were true believers who thought cruelty was kindness. And people like that don't have limits. Maureen Sullivan's first night inside those walls changed everything she understood about the world. She was lying in a room with 30 other women and girls. The beds were so close together, she could hear everyone breathing. Some women cried quietly into their pillows. Some whispered prayers that would never be answered. Some just lay there staring at the ceiling with empty eyes. Women who had stopped hoping a long time ago. There were no mirrors anywhere. No calendars. No clocks. Maureen realised there was no way to know what day it was or how long she had been inside. She turned to the woman in the next bed, an older woman with grey hair and deep lines on her face. Maureen whispered the question that wouldn't leave her mind. "How long have you been here?" The woman held up her hands, all 10 fingers. Then she did it again, and again, and again. 40 years. She mouthed one word before turning away. Forever? That's when Maureen understood. There was no release date, no sentence to finish, no end. Women walked into these buildings as teenagers and came out as corpses, if they came out at all. The next morning, the routine started. A bell before sunrise, 5 minutes to get dressed and make your bed, then mass in the chapel, but not with normal people. The women sat behind wooden screens, hidden from sight, because they weren't good enough to be seen by the rest of society. Then the laundry. The room was huge, full of machines that hissed steam and groaned like something alive. The air was so wet and heavy that breathing felt like drowning. The smell of lye soap burned your nose and made your eyes water all day long. You scrubbed sheets by hand until they were clean enough for the machines. You fed fabric through giant presses that could crush your fingers if you lost focus for 1 second. You folded everything into perfect stacks that would go to hotels and hospitals all over Ireland. 12 hours, sometimes 14, sometimes more. Your hands cracked and bled from the chemicals, your back screamed. But you kept going because stopping meant punishment. And through all of it, silence. Total silence. No talking, no whispering, not even humming. The only sounds allowed were prayers and the noise of the machines. You couldn't talk to the woman next to you. You couldn't ask her name. You couldn't share your story or hear hers. You couldn't cry with someone or comfort anyone. One whisper and you were punished. Try to make a friend, and they treated it like you were planning something wrong. This silence was a weapon, and the nuns knew exactly what they were doing. Women who can't talk to each other can't organise. They can't plan escapes. They can't remind each other that they're human beings who deserve better. The silence kept them broken. Years of this did terrible things to their minds. Some women forgot how to speak, not because something was wrong with their voice, but because the words just stopped coming. Others started whispering to themselves when nobody was listening. Tiny conversations with no one, just to remember what their own voice sounded like. And the worst part? The silence didn't stop when they got out. Kathleen Legg eventually escaped. She moved to England, got married, had children and grandchildren, built what looked like a normal life. For 60 years, she never told a single person where she'd been. Not even her husband. They were married for 38 years and he never knew. That's how deep the shame went. The nuns didn't just lock up their bodies, they locked up their voices. Maureen Sullivan spent 4 years inside those walls. She went in as a child of 12 and came out as a teenager of 16, with nothing to show for it except scars on her hands and memories that would follow her forever. And she was one of the lucky ones. She got out. Marina Gambold was 16 when they brought her to the Good Shepherd Convent in New Ross. Both her parents were dead, and she had nowhere else to go. That made her the perfect victim. One afternoon, Marina dropped a cup by accident, and it broke on the floor. The nun in charge didn't yell. She didn't raise her hand. She smiled, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a thick piece of string. She tied that string around Marina's neck. Not tight enough to choke her, just tight enough that she felt it with every breath, every swallow, every moment of every day. For 3 days and 3 nights, Marina wore that string. At every meal, she had to get on her hands and knees and crawl to her food on the floor. She ate like a dog while the other women watched in silence. After each meal, she had to say the same words out loud. "I beg Almighty God's pardon, Our Lady's pardon, and my companion's pardon for the bad example I have shown." All of this because she dropped a cup, but the string wasn't the worst thing they did to Marina. One winter night, she and 2 other girls broke some small rule that the records don't even explain. The nuns decided to teach them a lesson they would never forget. They locked the 3 girls outside on a glass balcony. No coats, no blankets, no shoes. The temperature was close to freezing and dropping. The girls held on to each other for warmth and watched frost build up on the glass around them. They stayed out there for 2 full nights. Marina almost died. Her fingers turned blue. Her lips cracked from the cold. When the nuns finally opened the door, on the 3rd morning, they just told her to get back to work. But Marina wasn't the only one. Kathleen King had it even worse. The nuns gave her different names throughout her childhood, and none of them were kind. They called her Satan. They called her Red Boy. They called her Number 5. Why Number 5? Because Kathleen's mother had been locked up in a mother and baby home, where she was known only as Sal Number 5. They called her that because she nursed other women's babies. Not a woman, an animal, just a number. And Kathleen inherited her mother's number along with her mother's shame. She remembers nuns hitting her head with a heavy ring of keys, metal on skull, over and over again. She remembers being left on a cold metal toilet for so long that her skin stuck to it, and she had to rip herself free. She remembers a visiting priest looking at a fresh bruise on her face and asking what happened. She was too scared to tell the truth, because telling the truth meant more beatings. Some women tried to run. They climbed the walls and ran through the streets begging strangers for help. The police always found them. They never asked what was going on inside. They just grabbed the women and brought them back to the nuns. And then came the last punishment. They shaved your head completely, took the last thing that was yours, the last thing that reminded you that you were once a person with a name and a future. If you're still watching, drop a comment. Did you know about the Magdalene Laundries before this video? These women were silenced for decades. Don't let their story stay buried. A lot of women went into the Magdalene Laundries as teenagers. A lot of them never came out. The numbers tell a story the church tried to keep buried. Researchers have found the names of around 1,900 women who died inside these places across Ireland. And that number is probably not even close to the real total because many deaths were never written down. At some laundries, more than half the women in the records died while still locked inside. At the Good Shepherd Laundry in Limerick, 6 out of every 10 women whose names showed up in records between 1961 and 1983 died behind those walls. At High Park in Dublin, the numbers were the same. Over half the women on the books between 1954 and 1964 never walked out alive. And here's what really gets to me. Researchers went through old census records from 1901 and 1911 and compared the names to gravestones at Magdalene burial sites. They found women who'd been locked inside for between 11 and 74 years. 74 years. That means a woman walked in as a teenager and died as an old woman in her 90s, and every single day in between, she spent washing other people's sheets. They went in as girls. They came out in coffins. Mary Gaffney never even had a chance. She was born to an unmarried mother she would never be allowed to meet. As a baby, she was handed over to the nuns. She grew up in their institutions. She worked in the Peacock Lane Laundry in Cork for decades. No pay, no choice, no life outside those walls. When the laundries finally closed, Mary had nowhere to go. She had never known anything else. She stayed on the convent grounds. Her whole life, from the day she was born, was spent in institutions run by nuns. Her cousin said that even years later, Mary would sit in a wheelchair and iron clothes for hours. Because that was all she had ever been taught to do. When women died inside the laundries, nobody held a funeral. Nobody told their families. The nuns just buried them in unmarked graves somewhere on the convent grounds and moved on to the next girl who showed up at the gates. Nobody counted the dead. Nobody cared. Until 1993, the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity had a laundry in a part of Dublin called Drumcondra. After more than 100 years of running the place, they lost money on the stock market and needed cash, so they decided to sell some of their land to developers. But there was a problem. They had to move the bodies buried in the convent cemetery first. They asked for permission to dig up 133 women. That was how many death certificates they could find. When the workers started digging, they found 155 bodies, 22 more than anyone knew about. No names, no records, no death certificates, no explanation of who these women were or how they died. And of the original 133, only 75 had proper death certificates. The rest were ghosts, women who lived, worked, suffered, and died without the government ever knowing they existed. A later investigation found that at least 315 women had actually died at that one location alone, more than double what the nuns had claimed. But here's what bothers me the most. When they pulled those bodies out of the ground, many of them still had broken bones in plaster casts. Ankles, wrists, elbows, hands, ribs, bones that had been broken and wrapped up but never healed the right way. The official record said falls and accidents, clumsy women who tripped on stairs or slipped on wet floors. Always accidents, always the women's fault. The survivors know what really happened behind those walls. The nuns burned all 155 bodies, mixed the ashes together, and put them in a single hole at Glasnevin Cemetery. 155 women turned to ashes and dumped in one grave. They called it an administrative error. That mass grave changed everything. Survivors who had stayed quiet for decades finally found the courage to talk. Documentaries showed the truth to people all over the world. The Irish public wanted answers. In 2013, the Irish government gave a formal apology. Prime Minister Enda Kenny stood in front of Parliament and said the words these women had waited their whole lives to hear. He admitted that the women of the Magdalene Laundries were let down by the Irish state. Maureen Sullivan, now a grown woman who had spent years fighting for this moment, watched the apology on television. She had been that 12-year-old girl they hid in the tunnel. She had turned into someone who refused to let the world forget what happened. "At last we have been heard," she said, "but this will never take away our hurt." The government set up a fund to pay survivors. By 2022, more than 800 women had received money, around 33 million euros in total. But the religious orders, the nuns, who ran the laundries and beat the women and buried them in unmarked graves, they refused to pay a single euro. Not 1 cent, not one building, not one piece of the land they had made money from. The Sisters of Mercy, the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity, the Sisters of Charity, and the Good Shepherd Sisters together owned property worth hundreds of millions of euros. Schools, hospitals, nursing homes all over Ireland. They gave nothing. They put out statements saying it was regrettable that the Magdalene homes had to exist at all. They said the laundries were just part of the system and culture of the time. They acted like they had no choice, like it just happened to them too. The same hands that tied strings around girls' necks, the same voices that called children Satan, the same people who kept every penny from decades of free labour. They offered regret instead of money. Just regret. The last Magdalene Laundry in Ireland closed on October 25th, 1996. Think about that for a second. 1996. The internet was already going mainstream. Titanic was being filmed. The world was getting ready for a new millennium. And in Dublin, women were still scrubbing sheets in total silence, still watched by nuns who believed hurting people was the same as helping them, still asking God to forgive them for things they never did. 30,000 women went through these places over almost 200 years. Some stayed for months, some stayed for decades, some never left. And by the 1950s, 1 out of every 100 people in Ireland was locked up in some kind of religious institution. Maureen Sullivan was one of them. She went in at 12 and came out at 16. Changed forever. She could have stayed quiet like so many others. Instead, she spent the rest of her life fighting for women who couldn't fight for themselves. She found other survivors and collected their stories. She pushed for investigations. She demanded that the government admit what happened. She made sure the unmarked graves finally got headstones. "I don't believe in unmarked graves for survivors," she said. "We were treated like nobodies. I won't let us be buried like nobodies." The buildings are still standing all over Ireland today. Some are falling apart, with broken windows and crumbling walls. Some have been turned into apartments where young people live, without any idea what happened beneath their floors. For the women who survived, and for the thousands who didn't, no memorial will ever be enough. No apology can give back the decades that were stolen. No amount of money can fix wounds this deep. They asked for nothing except to be treated like human beings. Ireland said no. This is crown and dagger. We don't hide from history. We show you what actually happened. If this story mattered to you, subscribe. More videos like this are coming soon.